All right. So the number three, the third point in our DEVILS acronym, we're talking about what are some of the key things or the dangers that we need to consider when we're talking about the future of democratic liberal societies. Number three is voter turnout or citizen participation. Okay. So just the fact that the term democracy as a term, the first part of it, the demos, okay, is Greek for people. The fact that literally one half of the word democracy is about the people, we need to really make sure that in a democracy we have people actively participating. And we kind of have two things we need to think about when we're talking about how people are participating with the election and the democratic process. The first thing is we need to have a high number of participation, meaning we need to have a lot of people participate in this. And currently, if we look at the number of voter turnout, meaning how many people voted in relation to the total number of people in the country, I think over the last 50 years, it's been declining, meaning there's been less voters. But fortunately, I think within the last 5 years, I think the voter turnout has been increasing, meaning there's been more and more people voting. And one of the biggest slices of the pie that have been increasing in their voting activity is the young people under the age of like 30. It used to be sitting somewhere around like 30%, and now it's getting up to maybe mid 40s within Canada. So it's rising, and it's really a good sign. And even within the last US election, they saw a huge turnout in terms of younger people or people of certain ethnicities that don't typically vote. So they're generally people are becoming more active in their participation of the democratic process. But we also need to think about this second aspect where we talk about it needs to be high quality of participation. So how much of this activity of voting that we're seeing is actually of high quality, meaning how many of these young people voting actually are aware of the issues that the candidates are talking about, and how many of them are just voting simply because of how the media portrays kind of the cartoony characteristics of the candidates. Okay. Another thing is in terms of voter turnout. I remember when I was a teenager, there was a bit of a movement talking about why should we participate in the voting system in the first place when we all feel that the options that are available to us are not really viable or sustainable. So there was this big movement that was happening. And right after that, there was another big push from like the popular media saying, like there was like the vote or die movement by certain rappers, I think, in the United States. And there was all these media influences on trying to either decrease or increase voter turnout. And oftentimes, as much as the focus should be on increasing the number, we also need to kind of have the 1-2 punch of not just increasing the number, but of the quantity or the quality of the participation, meaning how well informed are the people that are actually voting. The last thing that we need to consider in this aspect is it needs to be in terms of citizen participation, not only in the form of voting, the government or the governments being voted in needs to be open to criticism. But there's a couple different questions we need to consider when we talk about how is the government open or not open to criticism. So one of the main and most loud examples of government criticisms is obviously protests. And we've been seeing a huge number of that all over the world, especially in the United States with the Black Lives Matter movement. But the system needs to find a balance in being open to criticism, because there's a point where not allowing any protests is a huge issue, but also allowing any old protests and allowing them to protest in any way they want is another huge issue. Okay. Remember, we're still, even though modern ways of how we are as a liberal democracy is quite far, is pretty different than the original ideas of liberalism as like John Locke thought of it, but still we need to consider the ideas of the harm principle and just making sure that our rights and our wants do not trample on the rights and wants of others. So in order to kind of make the greatest system, or trying to maximize the positivity of the system, there's been different changes or different approaches that different countries have gone about doing this. And one of the ways that Australia has gone about trying to increase the high number of participation, meaning let's try to get more people out there to vote, they made it so that it's technically illegal not to vote. I mean, the penalty is like being fined like $50 or something like that, but still, I think their voter turnout went up to 95%. But what are they doing in order to make sure that the people that are voting, the 95% of the people that are voting, are of high quality, meaning they're well informed and they understand the process, not just going by the whims of the media, right? Another example that in the United States, there's a movement towards it. I don't know if there's any countries that are actually actively participating in it, but there's the concept of lowering the voting age, right? So they're talking about how if we look at the demographic of who's voting, it's typically the people that are above the age of 75 that's doing the most voting. I think it's like 80% of the people over age of 75 in Canada are the ones that are voting. But yet we have the young people who probably arguably have more of a stake in how the society turns, or how the society, what the society becomes. Those people are voting less and less. Okay. So meaning, should we then allow younger voters to participate so that they have more of an active voice in it? Because arguably they have a higher stake in what the society becomes than the people that are above the age of 75. Right? So there's a lot of different facets to consider with number 3, voter turnout and citizen participation. But essentially, oftentimes we're seeing systems that are in place currently in different countries, Canada or the United States, where these 3 kind of characteristics that we want to try and balance out are often imbalanced. Okay? Either people are not informed or there's not a lot of participation. So the thing that we want to think about in terms of this, how is this going to affect the future of the liberal democracy that we live in? Okay, what is the viability of this? Okay, so the thing that we need to understand is our need to just balance these 3 things to really try and maximize the efficiency of the system.